While mainstream news is focused on the two big Democratic wins in gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, there are also a whole slew of progressives and socialists that have also won their elections. With Sarah Jones of New Republic tweeting, Democratic Socialist members now include 50 new elected officials, bringing total number to 35. And she also adds that the Bernie Sanders-backed group Our Revolution won 19 seats and one ballot initiative. So first, I want to highlight a few of the big wins from last night before I get into one specific win in Virginia that I find really interesting. So first up, Larry Krasner, who's a civil rights attorney who won his race in Philadelphia for district attorney. This is a guy who was endorsed by the Philly chapter of Democratic Socialists for America and Our Revolution, and won his race with 75% of the vote, with 75,000 more people voting this time than 4 years ago. And after his win, this is what he told Business Insider. I think the Democratic Party should be madly wrapping its loving arms around progressives. The Democratic Party has got to stop running around trying to be close to the Republican Party. Bernie Sanders made that clear. So Larry Krasner is a guy that gets it. He understands that being progressive is actually a bonus when trying to win elections. And apart from having a career of fighting for civil rights, he's also big on marijuana legalization. So this is a guy who is incredibly progressive. And as I said, he's supported by the Democratic Socialists of America, which kind of gives you an idea of where his policy stances are. Now let's move on to the next person I want to talk about, which is Danica Roem. So Danica Roem won her election in Virginia and is the first openly transgender candidate to be elected and serve in a state legislature. And to do it, she beat 13-term Virginia incumbent Robert Marshall, who called himself the state's quote-unquote chief homophobe. And he's the guy that introduced the bathroom bill earlier this year that would have restricted bathroom use for trans people. And Roem had this to say after her win.
When you champion equality, when you champion equity, and you focus on the issues that unite us, like building up our infrastructure, taking care of our roads, making sure that our teacher pay isn't the lowest in Northern Virginia, like finding a cost-effective way to extend the VRE, the bread and butter issues, like expanding Medicaid to cover 3,700 uninsured people in the 13th district. That's the sort of stuff. Those are the issues that you gotta focus on as a delegate, that you have to focus on as a candidate, because that's what directly affects everyone's life every single day. This is the important stuff. We can't get lost in discrimination. We can't get lost in BS. We can't get lost tearing each other down.
So I like what Danica Roem here said about focusing on the issues that unite us. And she specifically mentions infrastructure, teacher pay, and expanding Medicaid. Because while social issues are of course important, the Democratic Party has done a bad job at speaking to the other issues and actually speaking to the policies and not just fear-mongering the other side. So as you can see, Danica did focus on those issues and specific issues that affected her constituents locally, and it allowed her to win. So it's the kind of advice that Democrats at large could use. Now, I want to highlight the next person here, which is Andrea Jenkins. So Jenkins was elected to the Minneapolis City Council as the first openly transgender person of color elected to public office, winning about 73% of the vote. Now, this is a candidate that was supported by the Bernie Sanders and Nina Turner-backed group Our Revolution, and she's a poet, an activist, a historian, and is known for addressing youth violence and improving the South Central Ward's neighborhoods. So the last leader I want to discuss here, and the person that I'm going to focus most of this video on, is Lee Carter. So Carter is a self-described Democratic Socialist and a 30-year-old veteran who defeated Republican incumbent Jackson Miller, who served as Virginia's House Majority Whip, and Carter beat him by 9 points. Now, Carter's key issues are putting a ban on corporate campaign contributions in Virginia and limiting individual contributions, and he also supported single-payer healthcare. Now, his win is amazing for multiple reasons, and one of them is his story. So 2 years ago, Carter wasn't even into politics, but then he got shocked while installing a lighting control system because it had been miswired by an electrician. And as New Republic reports, he blew out his back in the incident. He could barely walk for months. His frustrating battle with the state to get workers' compensation for his injury inspired him to enter politics. When I was able to walk again, he told me, I decided I'm not just going to walk, I'm going to run for something, because nobody should have to go through this. So here's this real working class guy who now felt inspired to get into politics. But now, listen to what inspired his decision to become a democratic socialist. My introduction to democratic socialism actually came through the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders. He went out there and said, I'm a democratic socialist. Here's what that means. It means I believe in strong unions, healthcare for everybody, and an end to discrimination. Well, that's what I believe in too. I dug a little more into it, and I realized a lot of the problems we have in today's society reflected in electoral politics are symptoms of economic problems. Carter said he's always been a bit to the left of where the Democratic Party was, and a little dissatisfied with what they were doing on a large scale, and never knew why. It wasn't until Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign that I put two and two together. I looked up to guys like FDR and Democrats of that era who were really rooted in working class politics. They had these mass movements of union workers who stood up and said, we're not going to be mistreated by corporate interests anymore. And they were able to achieve 50 years of stability and prosperity for this country. I always wondered why Democrats couldn't act like that again. So Carter is everybody I talk about on my channel. The voter that has been left behind by the Democratic Party, going too far right into being in control or being controlled by corporations and the wealthy. And Carter saw the success of past Democrats who spoke to union workers and just economic issues in general, and was able to utilize that as his message. Now, listen here to what he says about labels, because it also echoes a lot of what I've been saying. What we do when we get out there and talk to voters is get past the label entirely. My literature and all my paid communications are just about what I want to do when I go down to Richmond. In fact, my mail consultant had to add the word Democrat to my walk cards at the last minute before he sent them to the printer. So he's exactly right. Labels can be detrimental. You may have a positive view of the word Democrat, but other people will have a different view of what Democrat means, which is why you have to speak to the actual policies. And when you speak to those policies and talk to people face to face about them, you can get past all those dirty labels, like the word socialist, which has just been used as a fear-mongering technique and was also used against Carter. So this was a mailer that was sent out, which was comparing Carter with Karl Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, and is just a ridiculous and obvious fear-mongering technique. But Carter's ability to actually go out there and talk to people on the issues was able to get past all of this fear-mongering. Now, it's also really interesting that he got very little help from the state Democratic Party. In fact, the Richmond Times-Dispatch reported last month that the Democratic Party actually abandoned him. Carter said that in exchange for money, the party wanted a bit more editorial control over my messaging than I was comfortable with. The corporations I'm actively attacking fund the state party. It's obviously going to create some tension. So not only did Carter defeat his Republican opponent, he did it without the help of the state Democratic Party. And that was because the Democratic Party at the state level was too closely tied with corporations. And the message that Carter wanted to put out didn't quite work with those ties. So even without their help, he was able to overcome and defeat his opponent based on a real economic message that spoke to people at the local level. Now, I want to end on a quote of his here that was actually a quote from a month ago, but sums up the correct advice that other potential people running, whether in the Democratic Party or otherwise, should take into account. Honestly, there are a lot of candidates who are playing it safe, but playing it safe is not the safe bet anymore. That's the big takeaway I got from all of 2016. The center doesn't hold. We had Bernie Sanders on the left. We had Donald Trump on the right. Things are completely different. The parties are due for a realignment, and who knows how that's going to shake out.